actually, I got my start when I was still in high school. My mom was an editor for the Chattanooga News at the time. She was a society editor and the club editor, and she worked for the paper for 15 years. And so I guess I kind of worked summers and part-time until I graduated from college, and then I went into full-time reporting.
So you went to college too?
I did.
Here in Chattanooga? Graduated?
Yes.
And they have such a thing as journalism school? I mean, what did you go to school for?
I went to a women's college
Uh-huh.
and got a liberal arts education, but I was, it was my thing, the writing was, and I had been doing it since I was in high school, and I guess my mom helped to build those bridges for me, but I just had a natural nose for news. My philosophy was to just keep it simple. Do the who, what, when, where, why, and not to take sides or get too involved in each side so that I could accurately report. And people told me my word was good as gold. Yes.
Just a time frame that we're talking about. This is early 20th century?
Yes, I was born in 1898.
So you just started the newspaper around the time that Newell was lobbying for the suffrage movement?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Early 1920s.
That's correct.
So this was an era where it seems as if there was a lot of social change from our perspective.
Absolutely.
Did it feel that way to you?
It was a very exciting time.
Did you have opportunities that perhaps your mother wouldn't have had because of the times?
Truthfully, I think I made my opportunities. I was fiery and energetic and persistent. In fact, I was told if there was a Pulitzer Prize for persistence, I would win it. And I had a great nose for news, as I said. In 1925, when the Scopes trial was going to be scheduled to go on in Dayton, my editor wanted to cover it, and he took me along, really, I think, to run errands and keep the telegraph operator busy. And so I took that to heart, and I wanted to keep him busy every day that he was there, so I wrote many, many stories and had an opportunity to meet William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow, and most notably, I think, H.L. Mencken, who wrote about me a little later on. He asked me one Saturday night, there was nothing to do in Dayton, and he said, well, what's a guy doing in East Tennessee up here in the hills on a Saturday night? And she said, well, you've got very few choices. One, you can go to the picture show across the street. Two, you can walk down and look at the monkeys and the baboons and so forth that Barnum Bailey had sent in as a big joke because of the monkey trial. You can go to the drugstore and hang out with the local yokels, or you can go to the Holy Roller meeting. Well, he had never heard of a Holy Roller meeting. They were kind of common around here in the evangelical area and the Bible Belt. So we crossed the cornfield and snuck into the back row of a Holy Roller meeting. And H.L. Mencken had never seen anything like it. He was so taken with it. He asked us, couldn't we sneak down front for a better look? But I knew that was a bad idea. But he returned to those Holy Roller meetings several times and wrote about them fairly extensively.
Why are they called Holy Rollers?
Well, when they are blessed with the Spirit, they tend to roll around on the floor and shout and run about and wave their hands in the air and that kind of thing.
So much more entertaining than the picture show.
I would think so, yes.
But still, as a female, it must have been difficult for you to work as a reporter.
Certainly I was one of a few, very few. But as I said, I wasn't afraid of much of anything. When Al Capone was heading through Chattanooga on his way to prison in Atlanta, I met the train, got aboard, and sort of bullied my way into an interview with Scarface. And I asked him who was going to man the ship while he was in prison, and he looked at me with a kind of snarl on his face and a twinkle in his eye and said, "You are, cutie."
Did you ever marry, Nellie?
I did not. No, I did not marry. I guess my work was my husband and my children. I did some. I really loved my work. I guess one of the most important things I did was I cracked a burglary case, a robbery here at Highland Park Bank here in Chattanooga. Really, because my instincts were good, I think. I had my mom in the hospital. She had a broken hip. Her name was Rosa Kenyon, and she was old and frail, and we were in the hospital kind of checking out her hip, and the nurse just happened to mention that she had had an unusual guest at the hospital, a patient, and that he had left 2 weeks ago on a Thursday with his lacerations down the side of his leg. Well, the bank robbery had happened 2 weeks ago, Thursday, and she said, well, you know, strange thing about him, he slept all day and he stayed up all night. And I said, well, I just immediately connected him to the bank robbery. You know, I mean, I just had that kind of nose for hunches and things. And the nurse said, oh, no, it couldn't have been him. He was just too sweet and good a person. But that he had left behind some reading material that maybe I would be interested in, since I was a writer. Well, they turned out to be detective magazines. And I took them and read through them, and a lead story in one of them was exactly the same kind of bank robbery that this guy had performed. Gone through a skylight, found the employees, and took $7,000. So I went to the police chief and I said, hey, this is your guy. I know I've solved the case. And he thought I was just a silly, you know, little reporter, go home, little girl. Basically was what I got. But 2 or 3 days later, the nurse got a letter from the man. He had left some clothing and some keys on a peg on the back of the door, and he asked her to send them to him. So she knew I had been kind of, you know, had this hunch about the guy, so she contacted me. And we took the keys down to the chief of police, and immediately he said, Nellie, you're right, this is the guy. And we're looking at, how can you tell from a pair of keys? And as it turned out, the handcuffs that he had used on one of the employees were of a very rare kind and needed a certain kind of key. And that was the key that they were looking for. They had to hacksaw the handcuffs off the poor fellow. And so he knew immediately that it was the right person, and he was in Detroit. They went to Detroit, arrested him, brought him back to Chattanooga, tried him, and put him in jail.
I'll cut that at the point where he asks you about the keys, so we don't spoil the whole story for you. All right. So Nellie you spent your whole life working in newspapers.
Yes, I did. And I guess, you know,
great time to work in newspapers, huh?
I'm sorry?
A great time to work in newspapers. You covered the first half of the 20th century.
It really was, wasn't it? To go from the Scopes trial all the way through the Kennedys. I covered the Kennedys on the federal beat for the Tennessean. I moved to Nashville and began to work for the Tennessean in the 40s. During that time, I guess the most important story that I covered during the 50s was the coverage that I did of Georgia Tann, who was running a baby selling ring out of Memphis. And some of my investigative reporting helped lead to changes in the Tennessee Code for adoption, so that adoption records could be open and birth parents and adopted children could find each other if they so desired. Georgia was a horrible woman. She enjoyed the protection of the political boss in the area. She had a judge on her payroll, and she literally stole children and sold them to Hollywood stars and leaders of the country.
Just to put things in perspective, my understanding of journalism in the first half of the 20th century anyway is that it was a male-dominated profession, and women basically were asked to write about tea parties and social yada yada and that sort of less than exciting kind of stuff to cover. How is it that you managed to get yourself in a position where even male reporters had trouble maintaining that position of being an investigative reporter? It wasn't something that newspapers necessarily encouraged, was it?
No, it really wasn't. And I guess my dogged persistence had a lot to do with it. When other reporters would wait for a source to call them to give them a tip-off on something that was going on, I didn't do that. When I was assigned a beat, I visited every office every day and talked to everyone. So I scooped quite a number of things.
I can't think of her name, but it reminds me of that young women detective that they make movies about still occasionally. There went one a couple of years ago. Can't think of her name. Anyway. You must have been like that.
I must have been.
Quite a character, I reckon.
Yes, indeed.
All right.